Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, super intelligent shades of the colour sky blue pink, thank you for joining me once again, where unfortunately we have to deal with Paul Saladino. Yet again, Paul is a bloke who likes to have opinions, which he also likes to change every 3 minutes on all sorts of things. Today he's giving us his opinion on the Randle cycle. So let's hear Paul's opinion on the Randle cycle and see whether his opinion has any value or veracity or correctness. This will be fun. Off you go, Paul.
Cycle is interesting to me. I think it gets misinterpreted.
Yes, by people like yourself, Paul, among others. Yes, correct.
And there's some nuance here.
Yes, there is. And that's what you're missing, Paul, because you're not competent to speak about the Randle cycle. But let's hear it.
And the Randle cycle is the idea that our cells prefer to do either, carbohydrate metabolism or fat metabolism.
It's not an idea, Paul. It's a demonstrated fact. See? So straight away, you're in the wrong.
And so the hypothesis there, or the intention...
No, the fact, Paul, we can map this thing out for you. We can show you the physiological mechanism by which this actually occurs. It's not a theory, it's a fact.
If you eat these things together, it's going to lead to weight gain.
No, you made that up, Paul. No. Wrong. See, that's the way that people like Paul have to try and make their point, is by strawmanning, by misrepresenting the arguments of others. Neither Randle nor anyone competent to comment on the Randle cycle has said the Randle cycle will cause you to get fat, because that's not necessarily correct.
There's a lot of N=1 anecdotes of people who disprove that theory.
Sure, but fat gain is one potential consequence of the Randle cycle, but not remotely the most dangerous at all. The most dangerous, Paul, is chronic systemic inflammation.
Myself included, I eat a good amount of fat and a good amount of carbohydrates.
Well, that's a bad idea, Paul. And it's really, really obvious in recent years that your bad choices are starting to be worn, aren't they? They're starting to be really, really obvious and difficult to ignore, Paul.
And I eat them together all the time. And so I'm not gaining weight.
So what?
In terms of fat. But what's interesting about the Randle cycle is that it's not that your whole body does this. The cells appear to have the agency to do this at a cellular level. And
they don't appear to, Paul. They absolutely do. And we have mapped out the exact mechanism by which this occurs. And so what?
Decide whether one cell, even adjacent to another cell, wants to burn carbohydrates or wants to burn fat. So
well, that is possible, Paul, yes, but it's very, very unlikely, because the thing that primarily decides what fuel preferentially goes through and what fuel is more handbraked, shall we say, for want of a better term, is what's being served up to that cell via delivery of substrates from the blood, Paul. Okay?
I think that for people to worry about eating fat and carbohydrates together, it's just much too granular. I wouldn't worry about it at all. Because
but Paul, your advice is no good on a number of issues. You're telling people that it's perfectly okay to pour 600 grams or so of carbohydrates down their stupid necks every day because you do it. It's not okay, Paul. You're telling people that ketogenic diets universally are a problem, which is false, Paul. You did it wrong. That's what the problem was. What's next?
In that case, you're going to, number one, you're only going to eat carbohydrates or you're only going to eat fat. That's just not normal.
Normal doesn't mean optimal or ideal. Why does anybody listen to this buffoon? Please, if you're a Paul Saladino supporter follower, please explain to me, if you have the intelligence to string 3 words together, why that is. Is he consistent in his messaging? No, he changes his mind whenever it suits him on things. Is he a competent commentator on peer-reviewed empirical science? No, he doesn't have a single peer-reviewed publication in his name. And he has repeatedly made the most farcical, ridiculous errors in interpretation of peer-reviewed evidence I've ever seen from someone who claims to be a remotely competent scientist, which Paul isn't. He's a psychiatrist, trained in psychiatry, not in empirical experimental science. What is wrong with you people?
in our diets as Westerners. And I don't think that's anywhere near the top of the problem list for us in terms of gaining weight. That is not the reason humans are fat.
Oh, okay. Well, what's the reason people are fat, Paul?
Go ahead, have a steak, put butter on it, and eat an apple with it if you want to.
No, don't do the apple. That's the mistake, Paul.
Or eat a potato with it. I don't think that's a problem.
No, well, see, that's why people shouldn't listen to you, Paul, because it's clear that you have no idea what you're talking about. Absolutely clear.
For humans at all, because I think that there is this idea that our cells in our body are intelligent and they don't have to
nutrient partitioning. Yeah,
they can nutrient. They don't all have to do the same thing, and you can have cells that are doing carbohydrate and fat metabolism, at different times and different.
So what? This is just ridiculous. This is Paul once again showing his destitution of comprehension of basic physiology.
Places, I don't think it's a problem.
Yeah, when you look at...
Yeah, but Paul, what you think has no bearing on the reality of the universe, son. Well, all you've produced so far, in it looks like half this entire section regarding the Randle cycle, is your opinion that the Randle cycle won't make you fat, which is false. It might. In your case, it hasn't done yet, and there are reasons for that, Paul. That doesn't mean the Randle cycle isn't a real thing. It still is. It doesn't mean that it's a good idea to mix your carbohydrates and fats in your diet, Paul, because that's still not a good idea. And you've provided absolutely nothing but your vacuous, ill-educated opinion on this topic. I hope it gets better in the second half. I doubt that it will.
Some of the research on metabolic gridlock and when these things, when they do occur.
Okay, Thomas, how many peer-reviewed publications do you have in your name as an empirical research scientist? None at all. Should you therefore be speaking publicly to people about what the research science says? No, son. You're out of your lane. This is not your area of expertise. You should not be talking about this any more than Paul should. Neither one of you is remotely competent to talk about science.
And there's this particular protein that elevates and is a pretty inflammatory response, but it was in extreme amounts of fat and extreme amounts of carbohydrates in one sitting, right? And that actually...
What is that, Thomas? What is extreme?
Triggered. It was I want to say it was VKR or something. I'll have to look it up. It was called a VKR response. And it was basically, it would trigger this metabolic gridlock where essentially the mitochondria would just be in an effort to prevent toxicity, we're shutting our doors.
Right, so there we go, okay? While Thomas DeLauer is similarly incompetent to speak about science, as you are, Paul, right there he has demonstrated that he understands the thing better than you do. That's embarrassing for you, son. It should be if it isn't.
The membrane would just... So it was almost like this immune response that would happen.
It's not an immune response. Goodness gracious me. That's where it falls down, you see. This is why people like Thomas and Paul and everybody else who doesn't have a significant list of peer-reviewed publications in your own name as first author and investigator, you should not be talking about science to people. You are not competent. It's ridiculous.
I find that pretty interesting. I do think that people that are metabolically damaged subscribe to the Randle cycle a little bit more because it's easier for them to comprehend. They're saying okay, hey, if I'm broken, then maybe I can isolate these nutrients a little bit better. And I know a lot of people in the ketogenic community kind of subscribe to that because it was hey, my body's not necessarily recognizing carbohydrates as well. However, when you look at things, it's almost as though you just have a degree of peripheral insulin resistance at this point in time.
Oh my God. This is just words, Thomas. And insulin resistance is a construct, a false construct, put together in the wrong way, interpreted in the wrong way, and described and discussed by people out there, even in the scientific so-called community, wrongly, obviously, patently and demonstrably. Bring yourself up to speed, please. Or even better, Thomas, stop pretending that you are competent to speak to people about science. You're not.
And you're having glucose coming in and your body's for a temporary amount of time not knowing what to do with
72 hours, 48, 72 hours.
In worst cases, maybe in someone that's metabolically deranged, 1 to 2 weeks, right? Because in the rodents, I think we've seen 2 weeks, but I think it's faster in humans.
Oh my God. Shut up, Thomas. Honestly, son. Really, this is embarrassing for you.
I think the rodents adapt faster, but then take.
Goodness gracious, rodents do everything faster than humans, don't they? Live, die, move. The metabolic rate's faster. They're a smaller animal. They're a completely different animal. They have no bearing on what happens in a human being.
Longer to kind of revert back.
Well, in humans, we know, and I mean, I used to do a ketogenic diet when I was strict carnivore. I don't do that in any way, shape, or form now. And we see this in some pregnant women when they fast overnight for an oral glucose tolerance test. Like some degree of physiologic insulin resistance develops pretty quickly when we avoid carbohydrates, and
so what?
That means that if you have been doing keto for days or weeks or months or years and you try and eat a piece of fruit, your body's not going to know what to do with it for a couple of days.
Yeah. Well, so what? You shouldn't be eating the fruit, Paul. There is no place in the human diet for fruit. Goodness gracious. Do we need to talk about the effects of fructose again? Do we need to cover this? Clearly we need to cover it again because Paul still hasn't got it. I'm not going to bother covering it again today. You guys can look that up for yourselves.
It's efficiency, actually.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing. It just means give your body time. And I think, unfortunately, in the ketogenic communities, people get fearful of that and they misinterpret the way they feel when they eat a strawberry or a banana or 5 strawberries. And
okay, just noise, Paul. Just words, just noise. Nothing remotely scientific. Nothing correct. Nothing of validity or veracity. Just your stupid fucking opinion again.
Bananas as, oh, this is bad for me when it's...
You're looking well, by the way, son.
You've mothballed all of your all of your carbohydrate metabolism in your cells, and you need to bring that back into the forefront. Give your body time. It'll be fine.
No, you don't need to do any such thing, Paul. That is a mistake. That is the wrong thing to do. The exact physiological requirement for exogenous carbohydrates in human beings is not 1 single gram ever still.
Fine. And I'll just say this quickly, that I think that ketogenic diets have their time and their place, but that long term, I think that they...
What do you mean by a ketogenic diet, Paul? You haven't even defined what that is.
Do elevate stress hormones in humans, whether it's cortisol.
What stress hormones? Cortisol, you say? That's not a stress hormone. It's inaccurately described as such by people who are reductionist, ill-educated, ignorant of human physiology, as you clearly are, Paul, despite your psychiatric training and your general medicinal training prior to that. No, cortisol is not a stress hormone.
Cortisol or glucagon or epinephrine, we know that glucagon does not, normalize in someone on a long-term ketogenic diet the way that cortisol or epinephrine might.
Who's to say what is normal, or that normal is what we want to be in any given regard, Paul? Still.
And glucagon is in many ways a stress hormone.
No, it isn't. Still.
I've said this before, but I haven't heard enough people talking about it. There are studies in Atkins dieters and people who were doing zero carb.
Paul, you are not competent to discuss what is in the science, what is in the studies. You've shown that repeatedly already. A classic example from not very long ago is you claiming that the A1C test is sensitive to fructose damage. It isn't, Paul. You cited a study to prove your point that it is, and the study that you pointed to clearly, unambiguously, absolutely unequivocally shows that that statement is false. They actually said the exact opposite to what you claimed the paper that you tapped so-called proves. You're a buffoon. You don't know the first thing about reading scientific research articles, Paul. You should not be talking to people about science publicly. What's next?
Or low carb that showed like at least 1.6 to 2.1 times increases in an advanced glycation end product called methylglyoxal. And so
I've done a video about Paul's false statements about methylglyoxal as well, if you'd like to look that up. It's on my channel. It's called Paul Saladino, All Wrong Again, about methylglyoxal and some other thing he was talking about at the same time. Paul is a buffoon, folks. It is time we stopped listening to Paul Saladino. He will not give you good, robust, safe and effective advice. He is a dangerous lunatic that needs to remain silent from this point forward. The best way to make that happen is for people like you who follow Paul Saladino, if you're one of those people, to fucking stop it. He's a ridiculous buffoon. What's next?
I don't understand how we're getting around this in ketogenic communities and people aren't talking about the fact that...
Because, Paul, people understand science better than you do. Many lay people understand science far better than you do. Obviously.
Like, people want to look at fruit and say that's increasing advanced glycation end products, which isn't supported by the literature.
Yes, it is, Paul. Again, your incompetence to read literature is laid bare right there in that statement. Wrong.
And they're ignoring the fact that ketogenic diets increase advanced glycation end products associated with bad outcomes in humans. And so...
Nope. False again.
Again, I think there's a time and a place for moderation and discipline.
For a start, you haven't even defined ketogenic diet, Paul. Still.
Discipline with food. And for some people, limiting carbohydrates is very valuable. But I also think that if you look at the literature...
I have done, Paul, over, roughly 2.5 decades or so, as an experienced research scientist in my own right, researching and publishing works as first author, actual scientist who understands these processes, and actual competent commentator on this field, Paul. Do you see me giving advice about psychiatry to people online, Paul? No, because that's not my area of training. That's your area of training. You should talk to people about psychiatry and not nutrition. Idiot.
Ketogenic diets are not without potential downfalls.
Yeah.
Nothing is without potential downfalls, Paul. Your statement there is vacuous.
I encourage people that, are following a ketogenic diet to try it out. Try adding carbs in a healthy...
Why would you encourage anyone to do that, Thomas? That is the wrong thing to suggest to a person that they should do. That is irresponsible, incompetent, and dangerous advice. From, again, someone who is not qualified to give people advice on nutrition, Thomas.
Casual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, in a whole food form, right? So
yeah.
I typically recommend...
Oh, my God, seriously?
And yes, fruit.
Well, fruit isn't food, Thomas. So it can't be whole food because it's not food for a human.
Recommend, some tubers, like maybe some sweet potatoes.
Yeah, not food.
Things like that. Like start small, don't go ham. And I think that kind of end on this because we got to wrap, but that's where people run into issues is they go on keto. Then when they do go back to the well for a couple of carbohydrates, it's not like...
Why would they do that, Thomas? There's no physiological reason why they should do that.
Like they're having half a sweet potato and an apple. You and I both know they're not, right? So
right.
I've never encountered someone that has been doing keto responsibly.
They did it wrong.
That has had fruit, knocked themselves out of keto and said, oh my gosh, I feel terrible from eating that fruit. I have had people say that when they say, oh yeah, like I went out and had pizza and beer last night. That's a completely different ballgame, right? And they just might assume.
Oh, so what? For goodness sake, boys. Seriously. Folks wonder why I get so acerbic about this kind of nonsense. It's because people listen to you boys. For the life of me, I cannot understand why anyone with an IQ over about 40 would listen to anything you two have to say, but sadly they do. And your irresponsible claptrap is a danger to shipping, frankly. You are a public health menace, both of you. It needs to stop. Knock it off.
Associate pizza and beer as carbohydrate without thinking that's pizza and beer,
different effects on the gut.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also what else do you find with pizza? Does it come with fat? So are you mixing fat and carbohydrate in your pizza in a large degree? If only there was some bloke in the 1960s who'd come up with a description of how that's about. Oh, that's right. Sir Philip Randle. He did that. The thing that we started talking about a few minutes ago, about 20 minutes ago. We're back to that. It is a thing. Right. Good. Fuck me. Seriously?
polysaccharide, etc. And I'll just mention this because I know there'll be people in the comments saying, when I eat carbohydrates, I just crave them and I think about them.
Well, I wonder why that happens. No, I don't, because I understand exactly why that happens. Do you, Paul? Seems like not. Because you're normalizing, rationalizing, falsely, and encouraging folks to do exactly that at the cost of their long-term health, probably. Irresponsible, misanthropic, disinformation from a boy with a couple of qualifications who thinks that those couple of qualifications he's got qualify him to speak about everything. They don't, Paul.
That might be because your body appreciates the carbohydrates.
And it might not be too. That's the great thing about the word might, isn't it, Paul? It leaves the other thing entirely on the table and does not inform as to which of the situations is likely to be holding sway. It's just noise again, Paul.
In some ways. I think a lot of people do keto because they feel like they are
what is doing keto, Paul?
Imprisoned by food, or they don't want to be beholden to food. They don't want to have food cravings. And so when they go back to fruit or honey, they're thinking about these things more and they don't like that. And I get the psychology behind that, but there's...
Great. Now you're talking about your area of expertise, psychology, psychiatry. That's where you should confine your commentary henceforth, Paul, because that's what you're trained in. Not human nutrition, not metabolic pathways, and certainly not the interpretation of peer-reviewed published literature. Absolutely not, clearly.
There's probably a reason there too, that perhaps if you eat strawberries and you think about fruit, your body...
And perhaps not, before whatever it is you're going to say, because that's the great thing about perhaps, it leaves perhaps not on the table.
Is saying, can we get some more of that, please? Because that's...
Why do you think that happens, Paul? Some of us know why it does happen. It's clear you don't, or you're ignoring it because it doesn't suit your theology or your need to tell your, frankly, mindless followers the good news about their bad habits. Goodness sake.
It's giving your body a signal of abundance. So people need to navigate this however they choose to and whatever works for them and allows them to create the most healthy diet. But I do think that if you understand that physiologic insulin resistance resolves...
Which I do, Paul, and you do not. Clearly. When you finish pretending you don't know who I am, Paul, despite the fact that you and I have made several videos together, only about 5 or 6 years ago, perhaps you'd like to front me for a debate about insulin resistance, Paul, or any topic, frankly, because frankly, just about everything coming out of your mouth lately is absolute fucking rubbish in the last 3 or 4 years. Let's have a debate, Paul, face to face. I'll even be polite to you, but I will tear you to pieces. If you've got the stones, front up. I'm sick of your bullshit, son. What's next?
Over time, and you also understand that the reason you're craving these things might be because your body actually likes them and is doing...
So what? I like alcohol. I like marijuana. Does that mean my body should have those things because I like them? Fucking idiot.
Doing positive things, you can reframe it, and there is physiology to support that.
No, there isn't, Paul. False again. You clearly do not understand physiology. Still.
People don't have such a demonization of these things in their diets, which limits them also.
For sure, man. Well, Paul, where can everyone find you, brother?
Don't. Basically, absolutely don't. Right. There it is. Paul, you're a fucking idiot. You're also a coward, and pretending you don't know who I am is frankly pathetic, son. Front up, let's debate. Maybe we'll invite Dr. Sarah Pugh for that mass debate she's been talking about. Ted would like to show up too. I'm sure Ted will have something to say. See you next time, boys and girls, where someone else will be wrong on the interwebs, but not as wrong as Paul, because he's the expert in everything, apparently, even though he's not trained in it. All right. See you next time. Ciao for now.